I remember the smell before anything else. Lemon cleaner and roasted chicken. It hit me the moment I stepped onto the porch of my daughter's house. I had a jar of homemade blackberry jam in one hand and a small bag of bolts her husband needed for his mower in the other. Nothing fancy, just what a mother brings when she's still trying to stay useful. The late afternoon light hit the white siding of their house, the kind of perfect suburban home you only see in real estate magazines, and that I helped pay for, not that anyone ever mentions that part. I took a deep breath and opened the screen door, ready to knock. That's when I heard it. I don't understand why she's still alive. The voice was sharp, impatient, and too familiar to mistake. My daughter. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Maybe she was talking about someone on TV or one of her clients. But then her husband's voice followed, low and cautious. "Lauren, don't say that." Lauren, my only child. The same girl who once refused to sleep unless she was holding my thumb. The same little girl who cried every morning I left for the hospital when I was still working as a nurse. Now she sounded annoyed that I was still breathing. I stood frozen on the porch, staring at the polished brass handle. Inside, I could hear dishes clinking, the hum of the refrigerator, the quiet rhythm of a family that didn't need me anymore. You'd think after everything, after selling my house to help buy this one, after paying her law school tuition, after every sleepless night worrying, I'd be used to her distance. But those words, they weren't just cold. They were the kind that split something inside you and left it open. I didn't knock. I didn't cry. I just stood there and listened. She kept talking. "She's here every weekend now, Ethan. She's retired, not helpless. She doesn't need to be around all the time. It's exhausting." I felt my hand tighten around the jar of jam. Retired, not helpless. That's what she thought I was, a burden disguised as a person. Her husband mumbled something like, "She means well," and Lauren sighed in that way she does when she's done pretending to care. "It's just too much. I can't keep doing this." There it was. That tone. The one that always made me feel like I was standing in the wrong place. I stepped back from the door quietly, the wood creaking just a little under my shoe. The sound startled me. It felt like even the porch knew I shouldn't be there. I walked back down the steps, slow, steady, like I was leaving a wake behind me. The bag of bolts rattled softly in my hand. I thought about dropping them on the porch, but instead I left them neatly on the railing. The jam stayed with me. Somehow it didn't feel right to leave it anymore. I reached the sidewalk and looked back once. Through the window I could see the dining room, the perfect family scene I'd imagined for years. My daughter setting the table, her husband pouring wine, their little girl running through the room. And me, the invisible one, standing outside looking in. You know, people always tell you motherhood is forever. What they don't tell you is that sometimes forever is one-sided. I walked to my car, feeling the kind of quiet you don't hear, the kind that sits on your chest. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. The same eyes Lauren had, the same line across the nose. Maybe that's what she hated seeing, a reminder of where she came from. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to go back. And I didn't. I drove off, past the houses that looked like hers, past the neat lawns and mailbox flags. Somewhere between her street and mine, I stopped being her mother in the way I used to be. I didn't say it out loud, but I felt it. Like something had quietly died, and I was the only one who noticed. You think you'll recognize the moment your heart breaks, but it doesn't make a sound. It's just the way you start driving slower, breathing shallower, thinking less about what comes next. That night, I put the jam in the fridge, sat on the couch, and turned on the TV. A cooking show was playing. Some young woman making pie and laughing like she'd never been disappointed in her life. I turned off the sound and just watched her hands work the dough. For some reason, that felt safer than listening to anything else. If you've ever been told you're too much or not enough, you probably understand that silence can be louder than words. I didn't know it then, but that silence, that awful, heavy silence, was the start of something new. Something I didn't even know I still had in me. My hands still trembled when I unlocked my front door that night. The porch light flickered once, the same weak bulb I hadn't replaced in months. Inside, everything smelled faintly of dust and lavender, the way quiet houses do when no one visits. I set down the bag of jam and bolts I never gave her and sat at the kitchen table, the same one I bought when Lauren was 5. The chair beside me was empty, but I could almost see her there again, swinging her little legs, demanding peanut butter toast, cut in stars, not triangles. She doesn't remember those mornings. Back then I was 34 and working double shifts at the hospital. Her father had died the winter before, a car accident on Route 9, black ice and bad timing. The world shrank to a mortgage, overdue bills, and a girl with pigtails asking when Daddy was coming home. I told her he was watching over us. Then I sold his truck, pawned my wedding ring, and promised myself she'd never feel the weight I carried. I kept that promise. When she turned 12, I started tutoring night classes just to afford her braces. When she turned 16, I worked weekends at the clinic so she could go to summer debate camp. And when she got her acceptance letter to Ohio State, I cried so hard I scared the mailman. I remember hugging her in the driveway, saying, "You're going to change the world, baby." She just laughed and said, "Maybe I'll change our address first." I didn't realize then how much she meant it. College changed her faster than I could follow. The phone calls came less often, the visits shorter. The first Thanksgiving, she brought home a boy in a suit who called me ma'am like I was a stranger. She corrected me in front of him when I said ain't. Later that night, I heard a whisper, "I wish she wouldn't talk so country." It stung, but I brushed it off. Kids grow. They learn new ways to talk, new ways to see the world. I told myself it wasn't rejection, it was pride disguised as distance. But distance has a way of turning into something colder. By the time she graduated law school, Lauren was all heels and confidence. Her laughter sounded different, like it had been trained to fill boardrooms, not kitchens. I helped her pack her boxes, labelling each one with care. Office, bedroom, winter coats. She barely looked up from her phone as I taped the last one shut. "Don't forget your quilt," I said. "You used to love that thing." She waved her hand. "It doesn't really go with my new apartment." I folded it quietly and took it home with me. For years after that, our conversations turned into transactions. Birthday checks, loan transfers, quick thanks mom messages sent between meetings. I told myself she was busy, that success demanded sacrifice. But the truth whispered louder each Christmas she didn't come home. The last time I saw her before tonight was 3 years ago, when she needed a co-signer for a property loan. She brought the papers to my house, already signed everywhere but my line. "Mom, it's just a formality," she said. "You still have decent credit, right?" I stared at her, at the way she didn't even take off her coat, and said softly, "Do you even remember what colour your old bedroom walls were?" She blinked. "What?" "They were yellow," I said. "You wanted sunshine inside the house." She sighed, impatient. "Can you just sign the papers?" And I did, because I thought maybe helping her again would bring her back to me. It didn't. The house she bought was the one I stood outside of tonight, the one where she told her husband she didn't understand why I was still alive. I pressed my palm to my chest and felt the steady thump beneath my ribs. That was my answer. I was still alive because I hadn't let her break me yet. The clock on my wall ticked past midnight. I took a sip of cold tea, staring at the quiet room around me. Every surface held a memory she'd forgotten, a chipped mug from her first school play, a framed photo of her at graduation, that yellow quilt folded neatly on the couch. And for the first time, I saw it all clearly. Every sacrifice, every silence, every little piece of myself I'd handed her in exchange for love that never came back. My reflection in the window looked tired, but something had changed in her eyes. Not anger, not grief, something steadier, resolve. Because maybe the years she doesn't remember are the same ones that built me. Maybe the woman she forgot, the one who worked, cried, prayed, and still smiled, is the one who would finally stop waiting for her daughter's love to define her worth. And maybe, just maybe, the world outside that window was still big enough for someone like me to start again. The morning sun leaked through the blinds, painting thin gold lines across my table. I hadn't slept much. The night kept playing on a loop. The voice, the laughter, the sentence that sliced something deep inside me. I made coffee, even though it tasted like burnt paper these days, and opened the curtains. Outside, the neighbour's kid was learning to ride his bike. His mother ran beside him, cheering, terrified and proud all at once. That used to be me. Back then, Lauren couldn't go 2 steps without looking over her shoulder to see if I was still there. She used to hold my hands so tight that my fingers went numb. Somewhere along the line, she stopped needing to look back. I remember the first time I felt her pulling away. She was 15, tall for her age, always standing with one hip tilted like she'd already outgrown the world around her. I'd saved all summer to buy her a second-hand dress for the school dance, soft blue with little pearl buttons. When I held it out, she frowned. "Mom, everyone else is wearing brand names," she said, her voice sharp in a way it had never been before. "This looks cheap." I froze, still holding the hanger. "It's beautiful on you, baby, and you'll be the only one who... Yeah, the only one wearing something from a thrift store." She didn't wear it. She borrowed a dress from a friend instead. I remember seeing the blue one hanging in her closet afterward, tags still on, as if she couldn't bear to touch it again. That was when I learned something important. Love can make you blind, but pride can make you invisible. The years that followed only deepened that lesson. Her new friends had polished voices, soft manicures, and parents who drove shiny SUVs. When I picked her up from a study group one night, one of them looked at my old Chevy and asked, "Is that your mom's car or your grandma's?" They laughed. Lauren didn't, but she didn't defend me either. On the drive home, I tried to talk, tried to fill the silence. "You've got good friends, huh?" She stared out the window. "They just live differently than we do." I smiled, pretending I didn't understand the weight behind her words, but I did. After that, she started asking me not to come inside when I dropped her off. "It's fine, Mom. You don't need to walk me in." I told myself it was just teenage independence. I told myself every mother goes through this, but the truth was simpler. She was already practicing how to leave me behind. By her senior year, the house felt like a museum of her absence, photos gathering dust, her laughter stored in the air like an echo that never came back. She started spending weekends away, first for study groups, then for college prep, then for just needing space. I tried to give it to her. I tried to be the kind of mother who didn't cling. When she finally left for college, I hugged her too long. She pulled away first. Still, I believed that distance was temporary. I believed the road between us would always lead back home. The first time I visited her dorm, I brought a care package, cookies, a knitted scarf, and a framed photo of us at the lake when she was little. She smiled, distracted, scrolling through her phone. "You didn't have to bring all this, Mom. It's kind of a lot." That word again. A lot. It carried judgment, like love had become too heavy to carry. When her roommate walked in, Lauren's smile changed. Brighter, practiced. She introduced me as my mom. She's from back home. And the way she said it made back home sound like a place you were supposed to escape from. On the drive back that night, the radio played a song we used to dance to in the kitchen. I turned it off halfway through. I told myself it was just growing pains. I told myself every daughter pulls away and every mother has to let her. But deep down, I knew something had shifted permanently. She wasn't embarrassed by me for what I was. She was embarrassed because I reminded her of what she used to be. Years later, when she started her law career, the distance had turned into a wall. Phone calls became text messages. Texts became silence. Every "I love you" I sent hung unanswered in the air like a question no one wanted to hear, and yet I still believed. That's the curse of mothers like me. We keep believing. I kept her room the same, dusted the shelves, washed the yellow curtains, refolded the quilt. I waited for her visits that never came, making excuses for her absence. Every holiday. "She's working late," I'd tell the neighbours. "Important case." Then one spring, I saw her on the local news. She was standing in front of a courthouse, giving an interview about corporate law reform. She looked radiant, confident, sharp, untouchable. The reporter asked, "Who inspired your work ethic?" Lauren smiled. "I guess I've always been self-motivated." I turned off the TV. The room was silent except for the sound of the fridge humming. That night, I sat in her old room, the one she never came back to. The air still smelled faintly of her perfume. The framed photo from the lake sat on her dresser, glass cracked from years of sunlight. I traced her smiling face with my thumb and whispered, "You used to look at me like I was your whole world." But maybe that's the trick time plays on us. We think we're raising children to be strong. We don't realise we might be raising them to forget us. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere in the dark, a train horn echoed, the same sound that used to lull her to sleep when she was little. I sat there listening, breathing, remembering. And for the first time, I didn't cry. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual that Sunday. I was standing by the window, waiting for her car to pull into the driveway. She'd promised to visit, said she wanted to catch up. I even made her favourite roast, the one with rosemary and garlic. The table was set, candles ready, everything looked like it used to, except she didn't show up. By the time my phone buzzed, the candles had burned halfway down. Her text said, "Can't make it tonight." Ethan's parents invited us over last minute. I stared at the screen, then at the 2 plates waiting under the soft yellow light. I wanted to be angry, but instead, I just wrapped the food in foil and put it away, like hope stored for later. It became a pattern. Cancelled visits, unanswered calls, excuses that started sounding like rehearsed lines. Busy week. So much going on. Next time, Mom. When I finally did see her again, it was for lunch in the city. She looked perfect, not a hair out of place. Her suit cost more than my rent. I hugged her tight, but she barely touched my shoulder. "Mom," she said, smiling the kind of smile people use in boardrooms, "you didn't have to come all this way." "I wanted to," I said. "It's been months." We sat at a restaurant where the waiters spoke in half whispers and the bread cost $6. I kept my hands folded in my lap, afraid of knocking something over. Halfway through the meal, her phone rang. She picked it up immediately. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, her voice softer than it had been for me all afternoon. I assumed she was talking to Ethan, but then she laughed and said, "No, Chloe's fine. She's with the sitter." I froze. "Chloe?" Lauren blinked. "Oh, I was going to tell you. We had a baby." "A baby?" My voice cracked on the word. "You had a baby and didn't tell me?" She shrugged, cutting into her salad. "We were going to. Things have just been hectic." The waiter came by just then and she smiled at him like nothing had happened. I couldn't even taste the rest of my food. When we stood to leave, she hugged me again, one arm quick. "We'll plan something soon, okay?" But soon never came. The next time I saw her, it wasn't because she called. It was because I drove 3 hours to her house, uninvited, with a basket full of homemade jam and a knitted blanket for the baby. I remember standing on her porch, heart pounding, trying to calm my nerves before knocking. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, like a stranger showing up at her office, not a mother at her daughter's home. "Mom," she said slowly, "you didn't tell me you were coming?" "I wanted to see you," I said. "And meet my granddaughter." Her husband appeared behind her. Ethan. He had that firm handshake that tries too hard. "Well," he said, "the baby's sleeping. Maybe another time." "Oh, it's fine," I said quickly. "I'll be quiet. I just want to see her face." Lauren shifted, glancing back into the house. "It's not a good moment right now. She just went down for her nap." I smiled, trying to hide the sting. "Then I'll just leave these, jam and a little blanket." Ethan took the basket from me. "Thanks. We'll let you know when's a good time." Before I could say anything else, he closed the door. I stood there, staring at the grain of the wood, the faint reflection of my face in the glass. I could still hear the muffled sound of the baby crying somewhere inside. The wind picked up, and I realised I was still holding the other blanket I'd planned to give them. I folded it back into my bag, my hands trembling. That drive home felt endless. Every mile seemed to whisper, "You don't belong there anymore." I told myself they were tired, overwhelmed. New parents always are. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about the baby. It was about me. I was the part of her life she'd already outgrown. Weeks passed, then months, no calls, no pictures. I only knew my granddaughter's name because I heard it by accident on a Facebook post from one of Lauren's friends. I wrote her a letter, a real one. I told her I missed her voice, that I'd love to help or just listen or drop off dinner. I never got a reply. But a few weeks later, I received a text. "Mom, please stop showing up or sending things. It's confusing for Chloe. We're trying to create healthy boundaries." I stared at the word boundaries. I'd heard that word in therapy ads, in self-help books, in the mouths of people learning how to detach. It was clinical, cold, final. I typed back, "I'm your mother. I just want to see my granddaughter." No reply. The next time I did see Lauren, it was by accident, at a grocery store near her neighbourhood. I almost didn't recognise her at first. She was standing in line, phone in hand, designer purse hanging off her arm. The woman she was with leaned in and said, "Your mom's been calling me to ask about you. You didn't tell me she's still around." Lauren's laugh was soft, but sharp enough to cut glass. "Yeah? I don't know why she's still trying." My hands went cold. I turned away before she could see me, leaving my cart in the aisle. Outside, I stood in the parking lot, watching the cars blur past. For a long moment, I thought about walking back in, tapping her shoulder, making her look me in the eye. But I didn't, because some truths, once you hear them, can't be unheard. And that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people you once fed, carried, and trusted with your whole heart. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Somewhere inside me, a quiet resolve began to form. Not anger, not revenge, just the first hint of survival. I started the engine and drove. The hum of the refrigerator filled the house like static. I hadn't realised how quiet my life had become until silence felt like company. Then one morning, out of nowhere, the phone rang. I recognised her number before it finished the first ring. I hesitated, just long enough for my heartbeat to echo in my ears, then picked up. "Mom," Lauren said, her tone clipped and formal, like she was calling a client. "Ethan and I have been talking. We think it's best if you take a step back for a while." I gripped the edge of the counter. "A step back? You've been showing up unannounced, sending things, calling people. It's a lot." She sighed, as if she were the one exhausted from chasing me. "We just need space." "Space," I repeated, trying to make sense of it. "Space from what? From love?" "From guilt," she said quietly. Then she hung up. That word, guilt, echoed in my head all day. I stood by the window, staring at the fading lilacs outside, wondering when caring had turned into a crime. That night I packed away the baby blanket I'd been knitting for months, folded it carefully, tucked it into the cedar chest with the rest of the things I couldn't throw away. The next few weeks passed like molasses. No calls, no messages. I still checked my phone out of habit, even though I knew it was useless. My friends at church started asking how Lauren was. I learned how to smile and say busy as always, the way people say fine when they're bleeding inside. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from her, short, printed, almost legal in tone. "Mom, please understand that we need our own life. Constant communication makes it harder. Please respect our decision. Take care of yourself." There was no "love, Lauren," not even "your daughter," just her name typed coldly at the bottom. I sat there on the porch, letter in hand, as the wind tugged at the corners. My eyes stung, but no tears came. I'd already run out of them. A week later, my neighbour Carol came over with her usual batch of gossip and sympathy. She'd heard from someone at the market that Lauren and Ethan were renovating their house, apparently expanding the guest suite. "Maybe it's for you," she said kindly, trying to sound hopeful. But something in me knew better. The truth came later that month when I got an envelope, not from Lauren this time, but from Ethan. Inside was a typed notice, legal and sterile, request for property release. It turned out the house I was living in, my home for 20 years, had technically been under Lauren's name ever since I refinanced to help pay her tuition years ago. Ethan's letter explained they needed the equity and planned to sell. They were, in essence, evicting me. I sat on the floor for a long time, the letter spread across my knees. It wasn't even about money anymore. It was about power, about erasing me piece by piece until I was just a story they didn't have to explain. When I finally stood up, I made myself some coffee, black and bitter, and drank it without sugar. I needed the taste of something real. That weekend, I called Lauren. She answered, sounding annoyed before I even spoke. "Why would you do this?" I asked quietly. She sighed. "Mom, it's not personal. You always say you don't need much. Ethan just thinks this will make things easier for everyone." "Everyone but me," I said. There was a pause on the line. Then her voice hardened. "You're being dramatic. You'll be fine. We've even found you a nice senior community near downtown. You'll have company, activities, everything." I wanted to laugh, but the sound that came out was somewhere between disbelief and heartbreak. "You want to put me away so you can sell my home?" "It's not like that," she said, her tone sharp with irritation. You make everything sound cruel. Because it is cruel, Lauren. She didn't respond. Just silence, heavy and final. Finally, I said, do you remember when your father died? When we had nothing, and I worked double shifts just to keep you fed? I did that without thinking twice, because you were my world. Mom, she said softly, don't make this harder than it already is. Then the line went dead. That was the night I stopped calling her my daughter in my prayers. The following week, I packed my belongings, the framed photos, the dishes from my wedding, the little things that still smelled like memory. I left the bigger pieces behind. They belonged to the house now, not to me. I moved into the nice senior community they'd picked out. It had beige walls, forced smiles, and a schedule printed in Comic Sans. Every day smelled like disinfectant and boiled vegetables. Still, I made my bed, decorated the window with fake flowers, pretended to belong. One evening, I sat in the shared lounge, knitting by the flickering TV, when two of the residents started talking about their kids. One of them laughed and said, mine only calls when she needs money. The other replied, mine just pretends I'm dead. Guess that saves her the effort. They both laughed. I didn't. I just kept knitting because if I stopped, I might have screamed. Later that night, I stood by the small window in my room, watching the city lights flicker like stars, bombars. Somewhere out there, Lauren was probably sitting in her new kitchen, sipping wine, pretending she hadn't just buried her mother alive in paperwork. IDE 492 variant standard title, exact repetition of provided text. I didn't cry anymore. The tears had been replaced by something else. A quiet, burning steadiness. I started keeping a notebook. At first, it was just a way to remember things, but over time it became something more. I wrote down every moment, every slight, every word she'd thrown like a dart. Not out of spite, but because I didn't want to forget who I was before they rewrote me into someone disposable. I didn't know it then, but that notebook would become my anchor, the one thing that would later pull me back into the world I thought I'd lost for good. For now, though, I just kept writing, each word a small act of defiance, a reminder that silence might have broken me once, but it wasn't going to keep me down again. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual that night. Each second scraped against my nerves like a dull knife. I sat at their dining table, the one I had helped pick out when Ethan and Lauren moved into this house. Solid oak, strong, dependable, like I used to be. Ethan cleared his throat. Alice, we've been thinking, maybe it's time you had your own place again. The words didn't land all at once. They hovered, sharp and unfinished, until Lauren's silence gave them permission to settle. She didn't look at me, just traced her finger along the rim of her wine glass, watching the condensation drip down like she was studying rain on a window. My own place, I repeated, though I already knew what he meant. You've been here for a while, Ethan continued, his voice painfully polite. It's just... Chloe needs her own space, and we think it'd be better for everyone if... Ethan. Lauren's voice cut in, soft but final. She finally looked up, her expression carefully blank. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The air thinned. My hands trembled, and I pressed them against the table to steady myself. I looked at my daughter, my only child, the one whose baby teeth I kept in a tiny box in the attic, the one who used to sleep on my chest when storms frightened her. I wanted to ask her why, but she already knew the question. Instead, she exhaled, a slow, almost impatient sigh. Mom, this house is different now. You've helped a lot, and we're grateful. But Ethan and I need to focus on our life, our family. Our family. The words sliced deeper than any insult could, because they meant that I was no longer part of it. Ethan pushed a piece of paper across the table, a rental listing. Small apartment, decent neighbourhood, great for retirees. I stared at it, my reflection faintly visible on the glossy print. I can help with the deposit, Lauren added, her tone businesslike. It's not about money, Mom. It's just time. Time. I had given her 35 years of it. I nodded because that's what I always did, made things easier. I told them I understood. I even smiled, because crying would have been too humiliating. Later that night, as I folded my clothes into boxes, I found the blanket Lauren had used when she was little, faded pink, with a rip on one corner where she'd chewed it during teething. I pressed it against my face, and for a moment I could still smell her baby shampoo, strawberry and milk. The next morning, I left before sunrise. I didn't want Chloe to see me go. She was still asleep, her small hands curled around the stuffed bear I had given her. I kissed her forehead lightly, whispering, "Grandma loves you," even though she couldn't hear it. Lauren didn't come downstairs. Ethan carried my suitcase to the car, his posture stiff with discomfort. "Drive safe," he said, like it was an afterthought. I nodded and got in. The house stood behind me, glowing faintly in the early light, my daughter's dream home. My contribution to it, financial, emotional, invisible, was now just a ghost in its walls. As the road curved out of view, I let my hand drop from the steering wheel and wiped my cheek. I hadn't even realized I was crying. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the quietness of it, the way cruelty could be delivered without a raised voice, without a slammed door. Just soft words and polite smiles. The apartment was small, but clean, the kind of place where the fridge hums too loudly and every footstep echoes. I unpacked the essentials, some clothes, an old photo frame, my worn recipe box. I couldn't bring myself to hang the pictures yet. The walls felt too temporary, like they didn't want to know me. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the dark window. For years, I had defined myself as Lauren's mother. Now, stripped of that role, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I thought about calling her, just to say good night, but I knew it would go to voicemail. So instead, I whispered the words I used to tell her when she was a child afraid of monsters. "It's okay, baby. You're safe. You're loved." Except this time, I wasn't saying it to her. The next morning, I brewed coffee in a pot that sputtered and hissed like it resented being used. I sat by the window and watched the world move on without me, neighbours leaving for work, children waiting for school buses, life happening in neat, familiar rhythms. Something inside me ached to belong to it again, but I didn't know where to start. Days passed like that, quiet, shapeless, until one morning I noticed a sign at the end of the street, "Help Wanted, Maplewood Cafe." The letters were faded, but the word wanted burned in me like a small flame. I folded the newspaper on the table, took a deep breath, and reached for my coat. It wasn't courage, not yet, but it was movement, and sometimes that's enough. The bell above the cafe door jingled softly as I stepped inside, bringing a gust of October air with me. The smell hit first, coffee, cinnamon, and something warm and buttery that clung to the air like comfort itself. For the first time in months, I felt something inside me loosen. The place was modest but alive. A couple of men in work boots sat by the window laughing over their mugs. 2 college girls shared pancakes, their notebooks spread across the table. Behind the counter, a woman with silver hair pulled back in a bun was kneading dough with deliberate care. She looked up when she saw me. "Can I help you, Hon?" I held up the folded newspaper. "I saw the sign outside. You're hiring?" Her eyes softened. "We are. You bake?" ID 49211 variant standard, title exact repetition of provided text. I smiled faintly. All my life. Her name was Martha. She owned the cafe, Maplewood Cafe, the kind of place that had probably survived every storm this little town had weathered. She motioned me behind the counter, handed me an apron and said, "Show me what you've got." I hesitated only a second before rolling up my sleeves. The dough was soft under my hands, pliable, familiar. I didn't have to think. My fingers remembered. When I started shaping rolls, the kitchen quieted. Even the coffee machine seemed to pause its hissing. Martha watched. Then, with a half smile, she said, "Well, I'll be damned. You've got hands that know what they're doing." By noon, she had offered me a job. Part-time, mornings only, enough to keep me busy, enough to make me feel useful again. The pay was small, but the feeling, it was something money couldn't buy. That night, I went back to my tiny apartment, my clothes still dusted with flour. I caught my reflection in the mirror, tired eyes, streaks of grey in my hair, but there was colour in my cheeks again. I hadn't realised how pale I'd grown until that day. The next morning, I arrived before sunrise. The sky was painted with cold lavender light, and the town still slept. Inside the cafe, everything smelled of yeast and hope. I put on the old radio in the kitchen. It crackled between stations before settling on a country song about starting over. I didn't sing along, but my heart did. By 7, the regulars began to pour in. I served coffee, took orders, cleaned tables, and smiled more times than I could count. Martha's husband, George, liked to tease that I was their lucky charm because tips had doubled since I started. But the real magic happened with the baking. People began asking for my apple pie. They didn't even know my name yet. They just called it "that pie the new lady makes." It was simple. Tart apples, brown sugar, a pinch of nutmeg. The same recipe I'd made for Lauren when she came home crying from high school breakups. The same one I'd baked on her 10th birthday when the oven broke and I had to finish it on the grill outside. Every pie was a memory disguised as dessert. One afternoon, a young woman came in with her son, a shy little boy clutching a toy truck. She ordered a slice of pie, and when she took the first bite, her eyes filled with tears. "This tastes like my mom's," she whispered. I smiled and said softly, "Then she must have been a good one." The woman nodded, blinking fast, and just like that, something inside me healed a little. Not all at once, but enough. Weeks turned into months. The cafe became more than a job. It became a rhythm. Martha trusted me with the kitchen. George told the customers stories about how I could make flour sing. People started learning my name, Alice. Sometimes they brought me little gifts, a jar of honey, a knitted scarf, a thank you card. In those gestures, I found what I had lost: connection, belonging, a kind of family that didn't share my blood but shared my mornings, my laughter, and my pie crusts. And yet some nights, when I walked home under the streetlights, I still thought of Lauren. I'd picture her at her marble countertop, drinking her evening wine, perhaps glancing once at the phone and choosing not to call. I used to imagine she might suddenly appear at the cafe, smile awkwardly, and say she'd been wrong. But she never did. Over time, that ache softened too. One Saturday, Martha handed me a box. Inside were business cards, cream-coloured, embossed with golden script. "Alice Harper, Baker, Maplewood Cafe. You're part of this place now," she said simply. "You deserve your name on it." I stared at the card, tracing the letters with my thumb. My name. My own name. Not as someone's mother, not as someone's burden. Just me. That night, I walked home slower than usual, taking the long route through the park. The air smelled of pine and distant rain. The town lights glowed like candles in the dark, steady and warm. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward it. And though I didn't know it yet, the small cafe on Maplewood Street would soon become more than a place of work. It would become the beginning of something that would change everything I believed about loss, forgiveness, and the quiet power of starting over. Steam fogged the kitchen windows that morning as I pulled the first tray of apple pies from the oven. The crusts shimmered golden, the sugar bubbling at the edges. I slid them onto the cooling rack and the smell filled the room. Sweet, buttery, alive. That smell could stop conversations. It had its own kind of authority. By now, the Maplewood Cafe felt like home. Martha didn't hover over me anymore. George called me our secret weapon. The regulars had learned my schedule and sometimes lined up early just to grab a slice of pie before work. "Morning, Miss Alice," they'd say, tipping their caps or waving a to-go cup. I'd wave back, and it didn't matter that my hands were dusted in flour or that my apron looked like it had survived a snowstorm. I belonged there, among the noise and chatter, where nobody cared about who I used to be or who I'd lost. There was this quiet magic to routine, the way repetition could heal you. I woke before dawn, baked, served, cleaned, then walked home through Maplewood's sleepy streets. I'd nod to the mailman, who always shouted, "Smells like heaven down there today!" I'd pass the florist arranging bouquets in her window, the barber sweeping his steps, and I'd think, I'm part of this again. It wasn't the grand life Lauren had chased, no glass offices or charity galas, but this to me felt real. Martha and George became my closest friends. On slow afternoons, we'd sit in the corner booth with coffee and cinnamon rolls, swapping stories. Martha would talk about her kids, both grown, both living far away but still calling every Sunday. George liked to grumble about the price of sugar and the mayor's new parking policy. And me? I'd listen. I'd laugh. I'd even tease George when his glasses fogged up from the oven. Sometimes when the cafe emptied out, Martha would glance at me with that look, gentle, knowing. "You're carrying something heavy, aren't you?" she once said. I smiled, but didn't answer. She didn't push. She just reached over and squeezed my hand. "Well, you've got us now. That counts for something." It did, more than she could have known. One Saturday, the town hosted its annual harvest fair. Maplewood closed its main street and every shop set up a booth. Martha wanted us to join in. "You'll run it," she said, handing me the clipboard. "You're the reason half these folks come in anyway." "Me? Run the booth?" I almost laughed. But Martha was serious, so I baked like I was feeding the entire county. Apple pies, pecan bars, pumpkin loaves, you name it. By the time we set up, the table looked like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. The first customer was an old man in suspenders. He bought a slice of pie, took one bite, then came back 10 minutes later with his wife. "She's got to try this," he said. Then his wife dragged their neighbour over. Within an hour, we had a line stretching halfway down the block. A reporter from the local paper stopped by and asked if she could take a photo. "Who's the baker?" she asked. Martha grinned and pointed to me. "That'd be Alice Harper." I tried to wave her off, but she insisted on snapping a picture, me standing behind a stack of pies, smiling like someone who'd finally remembered how. That evening, when the fair wound down, we sold out of everything. I sat on the curb, exhausted but light, the kind of tired that feels good because you've earned it. The next morning, my face was in the Maplewood Chronicle. The headline read, "Meet Alice Harper, the heart behind Maplewood's sweetest booth." Customers started showing up just to meet the lady from the paper. Someone dropped off flowers. Someone else left a thank you card. And a few even asked if I'd ever thought about opening a place of my own. The thought made me laugh at first. Me? Own a bakery? I could barely afford my rent. But the idea settled in quietly, like a seed planted by accident. One afternoon, a little girl came into the cafe with her grandmother. She was shy, maybe 7 or 8. When she finished her slice of pie, she walked up to me and whispered, "That's the best pie I ever had." I crouched to her level and said, "Then I'll have to keep making them, won't I?" Her smile could have powered the whole town. There was something about seeing people's faces light up over something so simple, something made with your own hands, that reminded me life didn't have to be grand to be meaningful. You could rebuild yourself one crust at a time. Later that night, I sat by the window of my apartment looking out at the dark. The town was quiet. The hum of life outside faded into a kind of peace. I thought about Lauren again, not with bitterness this time, but with distance. She was somewhere out there, living a life I once thought was better, but I wasn't sure anymore. For years I'd chased her approval, moulded myself into what she needed, a helper, a provider, a silent giver. But in that tiny town, surrounded by strangers who treated me like I mattered, I realized something simple and sharp. I didn't need her to define my worth. I poured myself another cup of coffee and looked at my hands. They were rough, lined, dusted with flour no matter how many times I washed them. These hands had fed, built, held and lost. But now they were creating something new. Not just pies, but peace. Outside, the neon sign from the cafe flickered faintly against the glass. I smiled. Somewhere between the smell of sugar and cinnamon, I had found the smallest, sweetest kind of revenge. Happiness on my own terms. The first sign that Lauren's perfect little world was crumbling came quietly, an email of all things. It was from an old friend of hers, someone I hadn't heard from in years. She wrote, "Saw Lauren's firm on the news. Something about layoffs?" At first, I thought it was a mistake. Lauren's law firm, Lockwood & Kane, was one of those shiny downtown towers with glass walls and espresso machines that probably cost more than my car. But a quick search showed it was true. The firm had been accused of mismanaging funds and a few high-level partners were under investigation. Her name wasn't mentioned, but I could imagine the panic. Lauren was a master at keeping her life spotless. Her house, her clothes, her reputation. But when a crack appeared, it didn't take long before it spread. I didn't hear from her, of course. I didn't expect to. But a week later, I ran into an old neighbour from our old neighbourhood in Columbus. He said, "You hear about Lauren? That husband of hers, Todd. He's in some deep trouble. Bad investments. They say he lost almost everything." Lost everything. Those two words rolled around in my head like loose marbles. That night, I sat in my small apartment above the antique shop, stirring a bowl of soup, wondering if she was okay, wondering if she still thought I was some burden she had to carry. And then for the first time in years, I felt something strange, pity. It wasn't the cruel kind of pity that feeds your ego. It was quiet, reluctant, like a sigh. Because I knew what it felt like to have everything fall apart. The cafe had just closed when Martha noticed me staring out the window, lost in thought. "You all right, Hon?" she asked. "Just thinking about my daughter," I said. "She's still giving you trouble?" "No, I don't even think I'm on her radar." Martha tilted her head. "That's her loss." I smiled faintly, then went back to wiping down the counter. But that night as I lay in bed, I kept thinking how strange it was that the very people who thought they had it all figured out were the ones who collapsed the hardest. 2 weeks later, the cafe was buzzing with more business than ever. The article from the local paper had spread online, and people started visiting Maplewood just to taste Alice Harper's famous apple pie. We'd even started selling whole pies for pre-order. It was on one of those busy mornings that I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mom?" The spatula slipped from my hand and clattered against the floor. I turned, and there she was, Lauren. Her hair was shorter now, and she looked thinner, tired, like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. She wore a coat that was clearly expensive but wrinkled, and her lipstick was smudged. "Lauren," I said softly. She looked around, taking in the smell of cinnamon and coffee, the customers chatting, the shelves lined with pies. "So this is where you've been hiding?" I didn't answer. She didn't wait for me to. "Things have been rough," she said, lowering her voice. "Todd's been under a lot of stress. The firm, well, it's complicated." "I heard," I said. Her eyes flicked up, sharp, as if she wasn't expecting me to admit it. "Anyway," she went on, "I thought maybe we could reconnect. Maybe you could come stay with us for a while, just until we sort things out." It took me a second to process it. She wasn't offering help. She was asking for it. I could see it in her face. She needed money or stability, or maybe just the comfort of knowing I'd still be there when things went wrong. Because that's what I'd always done. Clean up after her, hold her world together while mine fell apart. "Lauren," I said quietly, "I appreciate you coming here, really. But I have my own place, my own work. I'm fine." Her eyes flashed. "You'd rather stay here in this bakery?" I nodded. "Yes." She let out a sharp laugh, but it wasn't funny. It was brittle, like glass about to shatter. "You really think this is better than being with your family?" I wiped my hands on my apron. "Family doesn't always mean safety, Lauren. Sometimes it just means pain that keeps showing up uninvited." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Her face tightened. She looked like she wanted to yell, but the cafe was full of people, and for once, she cared too much about appearances. "Fine," she said, stepping back. "If that's how you want it." She turned to leave, then hesitated. "You'll regret this, Mom." I almost said I already have, but I didn't. When she walked out, Martha appeared beside me, arms crossed. "Want me to chase her with a rolling pin?" I laughed, a short, surprised laugh. "No, she'll be fine." But as the laughter faded, I caught my reflection in the glass case, flour-dusted apron, tired eyes, steady hands. I didn't look like a woman who'd lost something. I looked like someone who'd found herself again. Still, part of me ached. She was my daughter, after all. I'd spent years teaching her to stand on her own 2 feet. I never thought she'd use those same feet to walk over me. That night, I cleaned the counter slowly, letting the rhythmic motion calm me. Outside, the streetlights blinked on, one by one. For years, I had prayed she'd come back. Now she had, and all I could feel was distance. But there was also something new, freedom. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The wind carried the faint smell of apples and sugar down the street. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere else, laughter echoed from a bar. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small or forgotten. I felt steady, whole. Whatever came next, I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The following week began like any other. Morning chill, ovens humming, coffee brewing, the small bell above the cafe door singing every time someone walked in. But by Wednesday, something had changed. Customers started arriving earlier than usual, some holding their phones, whispering, showing each other something on the screen. When I came out from the kitchen, Martha waved me over. "Alice," she said, eyes wide, "you've gone viral." I blinked. "I've gone what?" She turned her phone toward me. There on the screen was an article, "The Forgotten Mother Who Found Herself Through Pie." Underneath, a photo from the harvest fair, me in my apron, smiling, holding a pie like it was a crown. The writer had shared my story. How I'd started over after losing everything, how I'd built a new life through baking, how the community had become my family. The comments were full of kindness, people calling me inspiring, strong, real. Some even shared their own stories about being cut off by their children or rebuilding after heartbreak. It felt strange seeing pieces of my life spread across the internet, stripped of all the quiet pain behind them. But there was something powerful too. For once, my story wasn't being told by someone else. It was being understood. Martha leaned against the counter, grinning. "You're famous, sweetheart!" I rolled my eyes. "Famous? Please!" Half those people just came for the crust recipe. George snorted from behind the espresso machine. "Don't knock it, Alice. Fame sells pies." He was right. By Friday, the line outside the cafe stretched around the block. People came from neighbouring towns, even from Columbus, just to meet me. One woman said, "I saw your story online. My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 5 years. You give me hope." Another man told me, "You remind me of my mother. She used to bake like that, always said love was best served warm." It was overwhelming, all the attention. But beneath it all, I felt a deep humming pride. The life that had once been small and quiet now had a voice. Then, like clockwork, the universe decided to balance things out. That Saturday, as I was restocking the pie display, a sharp voice cut through the chatter. "So this is the famous Alice Harper." The room fell into a hush. I didn't need to look up. I knew that tone. Lauren stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a tight smile on her face. She was dressed perfectly again, hair done, makeup flawless, but her eyes looked tired, hollow. "Hello, Lauren," I said, my voice calm. "You've been busy," she said, glancing around at the crowd. "I saw your little story online. Quite the performance." Several customers turned to look at her, then at me. I kept my hands steady. It wasn't a performance, it was an article. She laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Right, about how your poor, cruel daughter abandoned you. How you rebuilt your life like some tragic heroine. You realise people in my circles have seen that?" Martha stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you're going to cause a scene, I suggest you—" "It's fine, Martha," I said quietly. Lauren kept going. "You really think this is noble? Airing our family's business to strangers?" "I didn't write that article, Lauren," I said, meeting her eyes. "Someone else did. They saw what I built and thought it mattered." Her lip twitched. "Oh, right, you've humiliated me." There it was, the real reason she was here. Not to apologise, not to reconnect, just to reclaim control. "Mom, do you even realise what this does to my reputation?" I took a breath. "You mean the reputation that mattered more to you than your family?" Her cheeks flushed red. "You always play the victim, always." "Lauren," I said softly, "you made choices. So did I." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe air was thick, heavy with the smell of sugar and tension. Then Martha placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You don't owe her a damn thing." Lauren glanced at her, then back at me. "You've surrounded yourself with small-town nobodies, and now you think you're somebody." "I don't think," I said. "I just bake." ID 59012, variant, title, exact transcription of story segment. Her jaw tightened. "You think this makes you better than me?" I shook my head. "No, just happier." That one hit her. I saw it, the flicker of pain behind her perfect composure. She turned sharply and walked out. The bell over the door jingled once, then silence. For a few seconds no one moved. Then an old man near the counter muttered, "What a piece of work!" And the room filled with quiet laughter. Martha let out a long sigh. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, for once, I really am." That afternoon, business didn't slow down. If anything, it grew. Word must have spread because people showed up offering to help, to collaborate, to feature my story again. I turned most of them down. I didn't want to be a headline, I just wanted to live in peace. But there was no denying it anymore. Something had shifted. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't forgotten. That night, after closing, I sat at the counter with a slice of pie and a cup of coffee. The cafe was quiet, save for the ticking of the old wall clock. I thought about what Lauren had said, how I'd embarrassed her, how I'd told the world. Maybe I had, but maybe the world needed to hear it. Some stories refuse to stay quiet, not because they seek revenge, but because silence only protects the wrong people. As I finished my pie, I looked at the Harper's table. logo Martha had sketched for me on a napkin weeks ago. It had started as a joke, but now, looking around at everything we'd built, I could see it taking shape. Something real, something mine. And I realised something I never had before. Sometimes, the sweetest victories aren't loud or public. They happen quietly, when you stop needing anyone's permission to exist exactly as you are. It began with the tone in Lauren's voice, that sharp, defensive edge that crept into her words when Ethan spoke to her about money. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I was wiping the counter one morning at the cafe when I overheard a conversation between two women at the table near the window. "Did you hear about Ethan's firm?" one whispered. "They lost that real estate case. Biggest one of the year. Rumour is investors are pulling out." The words clung to me like steam from the espresso machine. I didn't want to care. I had learned to stop reading the local news section that featured their pictures, Lauren with her perfect smile, Ethan shaking hands with mayors and businessmen. But that morning, something inside me twisted. It wasn't satisfaction, not yet. Just a quiet recognition that life had a way of circling back. A few weeks later, Lauren showed up at Maplewood Cafe. I almost didn't recognise her. Her hair was pulled too tight, makeup heavier than usual, and her smile, the one she used when she needed something, was plastered on her face. "Mom," she said, her voice falsely bright. "I was in the neighbourhood." The cafe fell quiet. Even Nora, the owner, who'd seen just about everything in this small town, gave me a look that asked if I wanted to step away. But I stayed behind the counter. "Coffee?" I asked. She blinked. "Sure." "Black." I poured her a cup and slid it across. Her hands were trembling. Not from cold. Maplewood was warm, filled with the scent of baked apples and cinnamon, but from something deeper. She didn't speak for a while, just stared into her cup. Finally, she sighed. "Ethan's been under pressure. The firm's going through some restructuring. It's complicated." I nodded. "Work always is." Her eyes flicked up to me, a mixture of pride and desperation. "It's just temporary. Things will bounce back. They always do." The bell above the door jingled, and a young couple came in. I smiled and greeted them, taking their order while Lauren sat, pretending to read the sugar packet. When I turned back, she said, quietly, "You've been busy here?" "Yes," I replied. "It's honest work." Something in my tone must have landed wrong because her lips tightened. "Well, I suppose it's good that you found something to do." There it was again, that old, cutting condescension, the one that used to make me shrink. But now, standing there in my apron with flour on my hands, I felt nothing but calm. "Something to do?" I repeated softly. "I'd say it's more than that." She shifted, uncomfortable. I didn't mean, never mind. When she left, she hugged me, stiffly, quickly, and walked out into the sunlight that no longer seemed to belong to her. I watched her drive away, her fancy SUV gleaming but lonely in the parking lot. That night, I got a message from Nora. "You did good today, Evelyn. You stayed kind but firm. Proud of you." I stared at the words for a long time before replying with a simple thank you. It had taken me 67 years to learn that sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's strength in its purest form. Weeks passed. Word around town spread faster than snow in January. Ethan's firm had collapsed. Lawsuits, layoffs, foreclosures. It was all over the local paper. I didn't go looking for the news, but the headlines were impossible to miss when I stopped by the store or filled up gas. And then one evening, as the cafe lights dimmed and I was locking the front door, I saw her car again, parked across the street. She sat inside for a long while before getting out. This time, she didn't wear her mask. Her eyes were red, her shoulders hunched. "Mom," she said softly, "can we talk?" We sat at the corner booth, the same one where she used to do homework when she was little. I remembered her pencil tapping against the table, her laughter echoing off the walls. But tonight, that booth felt like a confessional. She told me everything. Ethan's investments had gone bad. The bank was foreclosing on their home. She tried to fix it, to save their reputation, but everything was slipping through her fingers. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I worked so hard for this life, for everything." I wanted to reach across the table to comfort her the way I used to when she scraped her knees or failed a test. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of her words on that porch months ago. "I don't know why she's still here." "You'll figure it out," I said gently. I.Ed 59013 variant stantled exact transcription of story continuation. Tears welled up in her eyes. You don't understand, Mom. We're losing everything. I folded my hands together. Then maybe it's time to start again. For a moment, anger flashed across her face. Easy for you to say. You've got nothing to lose. Her words stung, not because they were true, but because they weren't. I had lost everything long before she even knew what loss meant. And yet somehow I had found my way back. When she left that night, she didn't hug me. She just said, "Good night," and disappeared into the dark. As I cleaned up the tables, I found something she had left behind, a business card from a local realtor. On the back, in her handwriting, it said, "If I sell the house, maybe we can start over." I didn't know what she meant, if she was asking for help or just trying to make peace with what was coming. But I tucked the card into my pocket and turned off the lights. The cafe was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and slow, blanketing Maplewood in a fragile calm. I stood at the window, watching the world go white, and for the first time in years I felt something close to forgiveness. Not for her, but for myself. Because maybe losing everything isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning of finally being free. It started with a photograph. One Saturday morning, as the winter light spilled across the cafe windows, Nora snapped a picture of me holding a tray of apple turnovers. "You look like something out of a magazine," she said, laughing as I tried to wave her off. A few hours later, she posted it on Maplewood Cafe's social page with a short caption, "Meet Evelyn Harper, the heart behind our favourite pies. Proof that it's never too late to start over." By Sunday, the photo had hundreds of likes. By Monday, thousands. People began to share it with comments like, "Reminds me of my mom," and "We need more stories like hers." Someone asked if they could feature me on the Cedar Falls Chronicles Community Spotlight. I said no at first. I wasn't interested in attention. I just wanted peace. But Nora said gently, "Maybe your story can give someone else that too." So I agreed. The reporter was a young woman named Elise, barely older than my granddaughter. She came one cold afternoon with a notebook and an easy smile. "I just want to hear your story," she said, "whatever you're comfortable sharing." At first, I talked about the cafe, the recipes, the little joys of working again, but as the conversation went on, she asked softly, "You mentioned moving here recently. What made you start over?" I hesitated, watching the steam curl from my cup. For years, I had carried the weight of shame in silence, the shame of being unwanted by your own child. But something about Elise's steady gaze, the warmth of the cafe, the hum of voices in the background, it loosened the lock I'd built around my heart. So I told her. Not everything, but enough. Enough for her to understand the quiet kind of heartbreak that doesn't scream, the kind that teaches you to keep moving even when you have nowhere to go. When the article came out, it was titled, "The Woman Who Baked Her Way Back to Herself." It told of a mother who had given everything for her daughter, only to find herself alone, and how she rebuilt not a career, but a life. I expected maybe a few kind comments, a couple of sympathetic nods. I didn't expect the flood of letters that arrived at the cafe, envelopes stacked up at the counter, emails pouring in. Women, and even a few men from across Ohio, some from other states, wrote to me. They shared their stories of being forgotten, of being used, of rediscovering their worth. One woman wrote, "Your story made me call my mother for the first time in 5 years." Another said, "You reminded me that dignity doesn't come from being loved. It comes from not losing yourself when love fails." I read each one carefully, often with tears in my eyes. I'd spent so many nights believing my life was small, invisible. Now I realized invisibility had never been the truth. It was just how other people chose to see me. Not long after the article went viral, local television reached out. They wanted to film a segment about them, the Maplewood miracle. Nora was thrilled. "You're basically famous," she said. I laughed, though a part of me tensed. Fame wasn't what I wanted. But maybe this was bigger than me now. When the cameras came, they captured the cafe filled with regulars, the smell of cinnamon rolls, the laughter, the light. They asked about my past, my daughter. I chose my words carefully. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. I said simply, "Sometimes the people you love the most can hurt you the deepest, But forgiveness doesn't always mean letting them back into your life. Sometimes it means loving yourself enough to let go. That quote aired during the evening news. By morning, people were stopping me on the street. Some hugged me, some just smiled with quiet understanding. But not everyone was happy. A week later, I got a text from Lauren. "So now you're some kind of small-town celebrity?" I didn't answer. Another message followed. "You made me look like a monster. People are asking questions." I stared at my phone for a long while. The old Evelyn would have called, explained, apologised for something she hadn't done. But I'd learned that guilt was a chain, and I wasn't wearing it anymore. I set the phone down and went back to kneading dough. The dough was firm beneath my hands, alive with warmth. It reminded me of resilience, how something soft could be shaped into strength, how heat could turn it into something that fed others. Outside, a light snow began to fall again. Through the window, I saw the reflection of my cafe, filled with people, laughter, and the smell of comfort. Later that night, Nora sat beside me as we counted the register. "You've built something beautiful here," she said. "I didn't plan to," I admitted. "I just needed a reason to get up in the morning," she smiled. "Maybe that's how all beautiful things start." That weekend, a local blogger wrote about me again, this time calling me the grandma who healed a town. I laughed at the title, though deep down it moved me. Maybe they were right. Maybe this cafe wasn't just mine. Maybe it belonged to every person who walked through the door and felt seen. By spring, the Maplewood Farmers Market opened for the season. Nora suggested we start a stall for my pies and preserves. "You'll sell out every Saturday," she said. I hesitated, then agreed. We called it Harper's Table, a name that felt like a full circle. The first market morning was cool and golden. People lined up before sunrise. Children ran past with sticky hands, dogs barked, and old men nodded as they passed my stand. I handed out slices of pie with smiles, laughter, and a quiet joy that no one could take from me anymore. As I looked out at the crowd, I saw faces, strangers, friends, people whose names I didn't know, all united by something small yet powerful, the belief that broken things can be made whole again. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. My story wasn't about revenge. It was about resurrection, the kind that happens when the world forgets you, but you remember yourself. The morning she showed up, the air was heavy with the smell of rain. I was setting up my stall at Harper's Table when I heard someone call my name. Mom. That voice, smooth, clipped, slightly too controlled. I turned and there she was, Lauren, my daughter, standing under a large umbrella, dressed in a cream trench coat, her hair sleek and perfect, her expression unreadable. I hadn't seen her in over 2 years. For a moment, time folded in on itself. All I could see was the little girl who once ran to me with scraped knees, sobbing for comfort. But that child was gone, replaced by a woman who looked at me like a stranger she had to tolerate. "Lauren," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're here." She smiled, the kind of smile you give when cameras are watching. "Of course I'm here. You've become quite the local celebrity, haven't you?" Her tone had sweetness on the surface, but there was something brittle underneath. I nodded toward the table filled with pies, jams, and small bouquets. "Would you like some coffee? Or maybe a slice of apple pie?" She looked around, her eyes scanning the setup, the customers chatting nearby, the hand-painted sign that read Harper's Table, made with love. "I just came to talk," she said, lowering her voice privately. We stepped a few feet behind the stall, near a row of crates stacked with flour bags. Her perfume, expensive, sharp, cut through the smell of cinnamon and butter. "You could have called," I said quietly. She sighed, looking exasperated. "You don't answer my messages. What else was I supposed to do?" "You texted me once," I replied. "Well, I was busy," she said quickly, brushing invisible lint off her coat. "But apparently you haven't been." The way she said it, like success was an accusation, made me pause. She continued, "Ethan's been getting questions. People at work saw the articles. They think I'm some kind of villain who abandoned her mother." Her voice cracked slightly, and for a second I thought I saw guilt flicker across her face. But then it hardened again. "I never said anything bad about you," I told her. "I didn't even use your name." "You didn't have to," she snapped. "People filled in the blanks. You knew they would. You always knew how to make yourself look innocent." Her words landed like cold rain. Is that what you think I did? I asked softly. Make myself look innocent? I think, she said, crossing her arms, that you've enjoyed playing the victim long enough. I came here to offer you something, a way to fix this. A way to fix what? Your image, she said, as if the words were obvious. Ours! If you just agree to stop doing these interviews, stop making this story about you being abandoned, then maybe we can work something out. Maybe we can rebuild. Rebuild, I repeated. You mean control the narrative, she frowned. You're twisting my words. I'm hearing them clearly, I said. The rain began to fall harder, drumming on the tent canopy. People were hurrying to nearby stalls, laughing, covering their heads with newspapers. Around us, the world kept moving, unaware of the storm brewing between us. Mom, she said suddenly, her voice dropping low. You don't understand how people see me now. I've worked my whole life to build a reputation, and now people are whispering. Ethan's firm is under stress. We don't need more bad press. There it was, the truth, plain and ugly. This isn't about family, I said. It's about your image. Lauren's eyes narrowed. Don't you dare talk to me like you're the victim here. You chose to air our private lives for sympathy. I didn't choose anything, I said, holding her gaze. Life pushed me out, and I built something out of the pieces left behind. That's not sympathy, Lauren. That's survival. Her mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, she looked almost lost. Mom, she said, softer now. I just want this to go away. I took a breath. So do I. But pretending it never happened won't make it disappear. She looked at me. Really looked at me. And for the first time, I saw confusion in her eyes. Maybe even shame. But it didn't last long. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, and said briskly, We'll talk later. She turned to leave, but before she walked off, she leaned closer and whispered, Just remember, not everyone is on your side. People love a rise, but they love a fall even more. Then she walked away, heels clicking against the wet pavement. I stood there for a long while, letting the rain soak the edges of my sleeves. When I finally turned back, Nora was watching from the stall. She didn't say anything, just handed me a towel and nodded. She's still your daughter, she said quietly. I know, I replied. And that's the hardest part. The rest of the day moved in a blur. Customers came and went. I smiled, served, listened to compliments, but inside something uneasy had settled, a sense that the storm wasn't over. Later that evening, when I closed the stall, I found a crumpled newspaper on the bench beside my car. On the front page was a new headline, Small-town baker's daughter responds to viral story. There are two sides to every family. My chest tightened as I read the short blurb. It quoted Lauren, not by name but clearly her words. She spoke about misunderstandings, distorted facts, and the danger of social media heroes. I set the paper down, folded my apron carefully, and sat in silence. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't angry, just tired. Then, almost instinctively, I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. Because while Lauren was busy defending her reputation, I was standing on something far stronger than public approval. I was standing on the truth, and the truth, unlike gossip, doesn't need anyone to believe it to still be real. The morning after that article came out, the market felt different. People were whispering, glancing my way, pretending not to. It wasn't hostile, just tense, like everyone had read something they didn't quite know how to talk about. I arranged the pies, straightened the jars of jam, tied the ribbons on the bread loaves tighter than usual. My hands needed something to do. Nora tried to make light of it. Hey, if people are talking, that's good for business, she said. But there's a kind of silence that follows gossip. Not empty, but loaded, and I could feel it pressing down. Around noon, I saw her again. Lauren, dressed sharper this time, with that deliberate kind of confidence people put on when they're scared to fall apart. She wasn't alone. A couple of local reporters trailed behind her, carrying cameras and notepads. For a moment I thought maybe she'd come to apologise publicly. Silly thought. She walked right up to the stall, stopped in front of the sign that said Harper's Table, and crossed her arms. Well, here we are, she said, loud enough for half the market to hear. The famous baker of Cedar Falls. A few heads turned. Someone nearby muttered, Is that her daughter? Lauren, I said softly. Let's talk somewhere else. Oh, I think here's fine, she said. You've told your story here plenty of times, haven't you? Her smile was tight, but her eyes gleamed. The kind of fire that comes from humiliation trying to disguise itself as control. "I didn't tell any story about you," I said, keeping my tone even. "You didn't have to," she snapped. "You let everyone else fill in the blanks. Do you know what it's like to have strangers come up to me and say they feel sorry for my mother? Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is?" "I imagine it's not half as embarrassing," I said quietly, "as being the mother people feel sorry for." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a paper cup. Lauren's jaw tightened. "You think this is funny? You've made a spectacle of our family. You've turned your bitterness into a brand. Congratulations." I looked around. The crowd wasn't moving. Every customer, every vendor, people I'd laughed with, baked for, shared mornings with, stood frozen. "I didn't build this out of bitterness," I said, steady but firm. "I built it out of being left behind. There's a difference." Her voice rose, trembling slightly. "You could have come to me. You could have asked for help. Instead, you went online and played the saint." "I did ask for help," I said, locking eyes with her. "You told me I was a burden. That was my help." Someone in the crowd gasped softly. The reporters scribbled faster. For a second, I saw panic flicker across Lauren's face, not from guilt, but from realizing she was losing control of the story. "Mom," she said, her tone desperate now, "you don't understand how this looks." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You're worried people might finally see who you are, not who you pretend to be." That was when she snapped. "You ungrateful woman," she yelled. "You should be thanking me for everything I've done for you. You'd still be rotting in that tiny house if it weren't for me. You think these people care about you? They're laughing at you." The words cut through the noise, through the wind, through every ounce of composure she had left. The market fell silent. Even the hum of the food trucks stopped. I could feel the heat of her anger, the sting of her pride unraveling. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "I'd rather be laughed at," I said quietly, "than live ashamed of the way I treated my own mother." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, people started to move again. Not away, closer. Nora stepped beside me, arms crossed. The vendor from the honey stall nodded. Someone behind me said, "We're with you, Alice." Lauren's face flushed crimson. "You've turned them against me," she whispered. "No," I said. "You did that all by yourself." She turned sharply, nearly slipping on the wet pavement, and stormed off. The reporters followed her, shouting questions, their cameras clicking like distant thunder. I stood there, breathing hard, not from anger, from release. It wasn't triumph I felt, not exactly, more like relief, a weight finally sliding off my chest. The customers came back slowly, pretending nothing had happened, but their eyes said everything. A few gave me a reassuring pat on the arm. One old man just smiled and said, "About time someone stood up to her." I laughed a little, though my throat felt tight. "I didn't stand up to her," I said. "I just stopped kneeling." The rest of the day went on as if the market had exhaled. I served pies, poured coffee, and talked about everything except what had just happened. But the undercurrent was there. The quiet understanding between people who had all, at some point, been made small by someone they loved. When I closed the stall that evening, the sunset burned low across the horizon, turning the rain puddles gold. Nora handed me a cup of cider and said, "You handled that like a pro." "I handled it like a mother," I said, just one who finally stopped apologizing. We laughed softly, and for once the laughter didn't hurt. That night, as I locked up the bakery and stepped into the cool air, I didn't feel victorious or righteous. I just felt whole. There's a strange peace that comes when you stop trying to prove who you are to someone determined not to see it. You realize their blindness isn't your responsibility to cure. And in that moment, with the faint smell of apples and rain lingering in the air, I understood something simple and final. Dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It just stands there quietly, refusing to move. The summer market in Cedar Falls always smelled like cinnamon and hay. It was a Saturday morning and the crowd was bigger than usual. Families walking between stalls, children holding lemonade cups, a band playing folk tunes near the gazebo. My stall, Harper's Table, was already surrounded by people waiting for slices of apple pie. It had become a small tradition, locals stopping by to chat, share laughter, and taste something that reminded them of home. That morning, though, I felt something shift in the air. Maybe it was instinct, Or maybe I'd simply learned how to recognise the kind of silence that comes before a storm. When I looked up from the register, I saw Lauren approaching. She wore a cream blazer that didn't belong anywhere near a farmer's market and sunglasses big enough to hide behind. Her hair was perfectly styled, but her face looked drawn, tired. Ethan wasn't with her. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just walked straight toward me, heels clicking on the uneven pavement. Conversations around the stall faltered for a moment. People noticed. Some whispered softly. "Mom," she said, her voice clipped, too loud. "We need to talk." I wiped my hands on my apron. "Hello, Lauren." The sound of her name in my voice seemed to unsettle her. "Can we not do this here?" she said, glancing around as if the small-town crowd was a courtroom she hadn't prepared for. "This is where I am," I replied simply. "If you need to talk, you can talk here." Her jaw tightened. "Fine." She turned to face me, lowering her sunglasses. Her eyes were sharp, glinting with something between anger and desperation. "I heard you've been telling people stories about me, about our family." I didn't answer immediately. The chatter in the crowd resumed, quieter now, like a murmur under the surface. "I haven't told anyone anything that wasn't true," I said softly. Her lips parted, but she didn't seem to expect that answer. "You think this is some kind of redemption tour?" she snapped. "You think selling pies makes up for years of what?" I interrupted. My voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Of loving you too much? Of believing you'd see me as more than a burden one day?" The wind carried the scent of fresh bread from the neighbouring stall. Somewhere behind us, a child laughed. It all felt too ordinary for what was happening. Lauren blinked fast, her breath uneven. "You're embarrassing me," she whispered. "Lauren," I said, keeping my tone even, "you embarrassed yourself when you told your own mother she wasn't welcome in her granddaughter's life. I didn't have to say a word. People can see who I am and who you've become." Her cheeks flushed red. "Don't you dare play the victim," she hissed. "You've always made everything about you. Even now you're using me for sympathy." Something inside me, long dormant, finally rose to the surface. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. "Do you really think anyone here pities me?" I asked quietly. "No, Lauren. They respect me because I stopped waiting for someone to see my worth. I stopped waiting for you." The crowd had grown still, not hostile, not amused, just attentive. Farmers, bakers, customers, people who had shared coffee and conversation with me every weekend for months. I hadn't meant for this to become public, but life doesn't wait for the perfect setting to reveal truth. Lauren folded her arms. "You've changed," she said bitterly. "You used to know your place." "I do," I said. "It's right here, standing on my own 2 feet." For a moment I thought she might cry, but pride is a cruel thing. It hardens instead of softens. "You're pathetic," she spat. "This whole town's only humouring you because they don't know what you're really like." I smiled sadly. "Then tell them, dear. Tell them everything." Her voice faltered. I took off my apron, folded it neatly on the counter, and faced her fully. "You don't get to rewrite my story anymore," I said. "For years I let your words define me. Weak, needy, embarrassing. But I see now those weren't truths. They were fears. Yours, not mine." Lauren's eyes flickered, searching for some reaction from the people around us, but no one came to her rescue. A man I barely knew shook his head. Mrs. Turner from the flower stall crossed her arms. It wasn't a mob. It was quiet judgment, the kind that doesn't need words. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just looked at her. The little girl I once carried through thunderstorms, the teenager I comforted after heartbreaks, the woman who now stood before me, too proud to admit she'd lost her way. "I forgive you," I said softly, "but I won't let you hurt me again." Lauren took a step back, as if the words themselves had weight. "You can't forgive me," she said, almost trembling. "You don't get to forgive me." "That's where you're wrong," I whispered. "Forgiveness isn't for you, it's for me." She stood there for a long second, her mouth opening as if to argue, but nothing came. She turned sharply, pushing past the crowd. Her heels clattered against the pavement, echoing off the market stalls until the sound faded into the hum of the afternoon. I took a slow breath, steadying my hands. People didn't say much, just nods, small smiles, a few words of kindness. Someone stepped forward, a young woman from the candle booth, and said, "That was brave, Mrs. Harper." I didn't feel brave. I felt free. As I picked up the pie server again, the sun shifted, glinting off the glass jars of preserves. A breeze lifted the edge of the tablecloth. I sliced a new piece of pie for a waiting customer, my hands steady now. For the first time in years, my voice didn't shake when I spoke. "That'll be $3, I said, "and thank you for stopping by." The market went on. Music, laughter, the rhythm of small-town life returning as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had changed, quietly and irreversibly. Inside me, the weight I'd carried for decades was gone, and in its place, something far stronger had taken root. For days after the market, I didn't see Lauren. Word spread quietly, as it does in small towns, but no one spoke cruelly. They didn't gossip, they reflected. People understood what they had witnessed wasn't a spectacle, but a breaking point long overdue. I went back to my rhythm at Harper's table. The smell of baked apples filled the air every morning, and the regulars still came. But something in me had settled. The tension that used to live in my shoulders had disappeared. I could finally breathe without the heaviness of waiting for her approval. It was late afternoon when Mrs. Dawson, the postmaster, stopped by my stall with a letter. "It's from the city," she said softly, her eyes sympathetic. "Looks official." I recognized the handwriting even before opening it. Lauren's. The paper trembled slightly in my hands as I read. "Mom, I don't know what you told people, but everyone here knows. About me. About us." Ethan left. The firm suspended me. "You got what you wanted. Hope you're happy. No greeting. No signature. Just that." I folded the letter neatly, placed it in my apron pocket, and stared out at the rows of pumpkins and honey jars lining the street. The autumn sun made everything glow golden, but the words lingered like a shadow. I wasn't happy. Not in the way she imagined. There was no joy in watching your own child fall apart, even when they had brought that ruin upon themselves. But there was truth now. And truth has its own quiet mercy. That evening, I walked home through the old mill road. The trees rustled like they were whispering, the air crisp with the promise of fall. My small cottage waited at the end of the lane, warm light spilling through the windows. I made a pot of tea, sat by the window, and looked at the empty rocking chair across from me. For years I had imagined Lauren sitting there, her daughter curled on her lap, laughter filling the space between us. But life doesn't always return what you invest. Sometimes it gives you back something different, something harder but purer. The next morning, a familiar voice called from the porch. "Grandma?" It was Chloe, Lauren's daughter. 7 years old, brown curls tucked under a wool hat, holding a small backpack. My breath caught. "Chloe, sweetheart, what are you doing here?" Her father, Ethan, stood a few feet behind her, hands shoved in his pockets. He looked older, defeated. Not the polished investor I remembered, a man who had learned too much, too fast. "I thought she should see you," he said quietly. "Lauren, she's not herself right now." I knelt and wrapped Chloe in my arms. She smelled like the same strawberry shampoo Lauren used as a child. The embrace was brief but grounding, the kind that reminds you that love can skip generations when it needs to. "Would you like some cocoa?" I asked softly. She nodded, smiling. "Mom said you make the best cookies." I didn't ask when Lauren had said it. I didn't ask what had happened. Some questions could wait, or didn't need answers at all. Inside, the fire crackled while Chloe coloured at the table. Ethan sat across from me, his eyes darting toward her every few seconds. "She's been asking about you for months," he said finally. "Lauren kept saying you were busy. But after everything that happened with the firm, the house, I think she just didn't know how to face you." I poured him tea and listened. "She's angry," he continued, "at me, at herself, at everyone, but mostly at you, I think, because you didn't fall apart." That last line hit deeper than he knew. "She expected me to break," I said quietly, "but I learned to bend instead." He nodded, eyes glassy. "You know, Evelyn, I wasn't kind to you either. I went along with her when she pushed you out. I thought it was easier." The kettle hissed softly behind us. I looked at Chloe, humming to herself as she drew a picture of what looked like 3 people holding hands. "It's never too late to be kind," I said. Ethan's shoulders dropped, a faint smile touching his lips. "She's lucky to have you." After he left, Chloe stayed the night. I tucked her into the small guest bed, the same one Lauren once slept in, and watched as she drifted off. Her hand clutched a small stuffed rabbit, its ear hanging loose. I sat there for a long while, listening to her breathing, feeling both the ache and peace that motherhood never really ends, it just changes shape. Outside, the wind picked up. A single leaf pressed against the window, trembling before sliding away. Days turned into weeks. Lauren didn't call. Ethan brought Chloe every other weekend, sometimes staying for dinner. The house felt alive again, quietly, naturally. Then one cold Sunday, as I was taking pies out of the oven, I heard a car door slam. I wiped my hands and looked out the window. Lauren stood by the gate. She looked nothing like the woman who had faced me at the market. Her hair was unstyled, her posture small. She wasn't wearing armour anymore. No makeup, no confidence, just exhaustion. I didn't move to open the door right away. But then I saw her eyes, red and uncertain, and I realised she wasn't there to fight. When I stepped outside, she didn't speak at first. Her gaze drifted toward the porch swing, the flower boxes, the faint smell of cinnamon drifting from the window. "I lost everything," she said finally, voice cracking. "The house, the job, Ethan, everyone. And it's my fault." I didn't say anything. "I used to think strength was control," she whispered. "But you stood there in front of everyone and didn't even raise your voice. You didn't fight me. You let me destroy myself." I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't move closer. "Mom," she said, barely audible, "how did you do it? How did you keep going?" I looked at her, the woman who had once been my whole world, standing on the edge of her own reckoning. "I learned," I said softly, "that peace isn't something someone gives you. You build it, one day at a time." She nodded slowly, tears falling freely now. And for the first time in years, I saw her not as my enemy, but as the frightened child she once was. The wind carried the faint sound of church bells from town. The scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. Lauren didn't ask to come inside. I didn't invite her. We just stood there, silent, letting the years of bitterness drift between us like smoke that was finally thinning. The morning after Lauren's visit, the air felt different, lighter, cleaner, like the house had exhaled. I brewed coffee and watched the steam curl upward, catching sunlight through the kitchen window. For years, that same light had felt harsh, exposing everything I'd lost. But now, it felt like something new was starting, quietly, without permission or announcement. Chloe stirred awake in the guest room, her tiny footsteps padding down the hall. "Grandma, can we make pancakes?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "Only if you help," I said, handing her the whisk. She grinned and took it like it was a royal scepter. The sound of her laughter filled the kitchen, mixing with the sizzling of butter and the smell of maple syrup. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was peace, something I'd stopped believing I could have. After breakfast, we walked to the market together. People greeted us with warm smiles. The vendor from the next stall handed Chloe a small jar of honey. "For the little helper," he said. She thanked him shyly, clutching it like treasure. My stall, Harper's Table, looked the same as always. Checkered cloth, trays of pies, handwritten signs. But today it felt different. There was no shadow of shame behind me. No fear of what Lauren might say or who might whisper. I was simply there, whole and steady. A reporter from Cedar Falls Chronicle approached. She had written the first article about my story months ago, the one that had gone viral online. "Evelyn," she said, smiling, "we're doing a follow-up piece about people in town who turn their pain into purpose. Would you be open to that?" I hesitated, then nodded. "As long as it's about more than revenge," she smiled. "It is. It's about survival." When she left, I thought about that word, revenge. It used to taste bitter. Now it didn't taste like anything at all. Because real revenge, I realised, isn't about making someone else pay. It's about refusing to keep paying for what they did to you. That afternoon, Ethan stopped by to pick up Chloe. He looked better, calmer, lighter. "She's been talking about you non-stop," he said, watching Chloe pack her crayons. "Lauren wants to see her later this week. I think she's trying." "I hope she is," I said, and I meant it. Before they left, Chloe hugged me tightly. "Grandma," she whispered, "Mom said she's sorry." I brushed her hair gently. "That's good, sweetheart. Saying sorry is a brave thing." She nodded, then ran off toward the car. After they left, I stood on the porch for a long while, watching the road curve out of sight. The wind carried the scent of apple blossoms from somewhere up the hill. The same breeze that once felt cold now brushed against me like an old friend. A week later, the article came out. The headline read, "The Woman Who Chose Peace Over Revenge." It told the story not of betrayal or downfall, but of endurance. How a quiet woman rebuilt her life one pie and one kind word at a time. People came from nearby towns to meet me. Some wanted advice, others just wanted to talk. They shared stories about sons who stopped calling, daughters who forgot birthdays, siblings who turned cruel. I listened. Sometimes that's all anyone needs, to be heard without judgment. One woman, about my age, said, "You make it sound easy." I smiled. "It isn't, but neither is carrying bitterness." She nodded slowly, eyes welling. "You gave me hope." Later that evening, I walked through the town square as the sun went down. Lights flickered on in the bakery windows, kids rode bicycles down the street, and an older man tuned his guitar near the fountain. Life was simple, but it was full. At the edge of the square there was a mural. I hadn't noticed it before. Someone had painted it on the side of the old library, a scene of the farmer's market, the stalls, the people, and right in the middle, a woman behind a pie table, smiling. Above it, the words read, "Kindness grows where pride once stood." I didn't need to ask who inspired it. I stood there for a long time, hand pressed to my chest, feeling something warm spread through me. Not pride, exactly, but peace. That night, I lit a single candle on the kitchen table and made myself a cup of tea. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the fridge and the ticking of the old clock. I took out the letter Lauren had sent, the angry one, and read it again. The words didn't sting anymore, they were just ink on paper. I folded it once more and slipped it into the drawer, not out of bitterness, but closure. Before going to bed, I opened the window and looked up at the sky. Stars dotted the darkness like scattered sugar. Somewhere out there, Lauren was trying to rebuild too. Maybe we'd never go back to what we were, but maybe we didn't need to. I'd learned that family isn't always about who shares your blood. It's about who shares your heart. And mine was finally full again. The next morning, when I unlocked Harper's table, a small crowd was already waiting. Someone had brought flowers. Another person held a sign that said, "We love you, Miss Evelyn." I laughed, wiping my hands on my apron. "Well, you all better be hungry," I said. They were. The line stretched down the block, full of faces, old, young, familiar, and new. And as I handed out each pie, I realized that my revenge had already come and gone long ago. It wasn't fire. It wasn't rage. It was the quiet, unstoppable joy of a woman who refused to disappear. And in the end, that was enough. Because the sweetest revenge is simply living well. As I look back now, I don't see a story of bitterness. I see a story of survival. What happened between Lauren and me wasn't about hate. It was about learning when to let go, when to stop begging for love that only hurts you. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's choosing peace over pain. And if that's not revenge, I don't know what is. Life goes on quietly here in Cedar Falls. The pies still sell out every Saturday, Chloe still calls every weekend, and the world feels lighter. I stopped waiting for apologies that may never come. Because the truth is, some of the best revenge stories aren't loud or cruel. They're soft, patient, and full of grace. If you believe in stories like this, real family revenge stories where strength grows out of heartbreak, subscribe to the channel. We share true revenge stories and family drama that remind us that even when the people we love hurt us the most, dignity, peace, and quiet courage can still win in the end. Stay, listen, and maybe you'll find a little bit of your own story here too.